As we corresponded with so many of you over the past few weeks, the question I received the most was, what does business attire mean? I think this is a really legitimate question because just a year ago, business meant pants were optional since we were all on Zoom anyway. All kidding aside, everyone looks absolutely beautiful. We're so happy that you're here tonight. I'm Mark Seaman, Vice President and Director of Communications for the Center. And we would like to begin the evening with a land acknowledgement, written with the help and support of my friend, Dr. Dina Dart, who's here this evening. We at the Stanley Center are cognizant of our presence in the stolen lands of the native people of the Mississippi Delta, the ancient homelands of the groups now known as the Meskwaki, Kickapoo, and Alagala Sioux. We're committed as an organization and as individuals to leverage our resources in support of Native justice. We have begun a conversation with local Native stakeholders, which is manifest in the Tree of Accountability, to begin thinking through what true allyship and meaningful collaboration could mean right here where we live and work. In this way, we move forward from a mere performative land acknowledgement in the direction of true accountability for balance and justice in our shared world. It's on this critical note that I have the high honor of introducing a welcome message from Her Excellency, Senator and former President of the Republic of Marshall Islands, Dr. Hilda Heine. For those of you upstairs, please take just a moment to adjust yourselves to a place where you might be able to see the screen. I'm so sorry we don't have perfect seating for everybody, but those tables, I just want to make sure you can see the screen. Senator Heine is a revered figure in the climate change community as a champion for those who are too often ignored.
Greetings and welcome all, colleagues, friends, and supporters to this special event, the opening and dedication of the new headquarters for Stanley Center for Peace and Security. My name is Hilda Heine. I am a friend of the Stanley Center. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support and commitments and your respective roles in safeguarding our environment for future generations to enjoy. I am honored to bring the welcome remarks and to be part of this auspicious occasion. In this Stanley Center for Peace and Security, you are in a building that is one of the most environmentally friendly and ecologically sustainable building in the world. It is an excellent example of how living environmentally friendly needs to be scaled up around the globe. To tell you the truth, I feel disappointed that I'm not physically there to enjoy the premises, to see the innovations firsthand along with all of you. The Stanley Center has partnered with people, institutions, and governments at all levels to search for solutions to our greatest global challenges. Through inclusive dialogue, it has sought novel approaches to mitigating climate change, avoiding the use of nuclear weapons, and preventing mass violence and atrocities around the world. Indeed, the world is not secure if even an island nation like mine, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, is not secured. Marshall Islands is facing threats directly linked to climate change, of which sea level rise is expected to be the most profound. At only 2 meters above sea level, atoll nations like ours are the most vulnerable to the rising sea level. Unlike larger island nations, we have no mountains and no higher grounds to move to. And the science is devastatingly clear. We know that even under best case scenarios, there will be an increase in heat, changes in rainfall, less security in food, and increases of infection and diseases. Those most vulnerable will be hit the hardest. Our islands can expect 20 inches of sea level rise between 30 to 50 years. Those mere 20 inches of sea level rise will make many islands, including mine, uninhabitable. Marshall Islands leaders, alongside other committed world leaders, fought at COP21 to enshrine 1.5 degrees as the global temperature limit in the Paris Agreement. As of the latest report from the IPCC, the world is slated to surpass that in as near as 2027, if not sooner. Our country is now in the process of developing our National Adaptation Plan, or what we call our Survival Plan, because changes internationally are not happening soon enough. The burden has been placed on us to find as much as $9 billion to elevate our islands, or through land reclamation, extend our islands as a way of maintaining our sovereignty. We've been forced to pursue extreme solutions just so that we can remain in our own homes. Globally, the call for higher ambitions at cutting emission levels to net zero by mid-century, scaling up the use of renewable energy, committing to increase financing for adaptation and to support vulnerable communities through a loss and damage fund cannot be more urgent. Actors at all levels, and from individual corporations, small communities, to weak and powerful countries alike, are encouraged to do their parts. Existential threat to our livelihoods and our very own lives is at stake if we fail to take proper measures. Verbalizing our commitments is one thing, but acting on those commitments speak louder about us and what we represent. What we are celebrating today is an excellent example by an organization that is committed to its core values. The Stanley Center for Peace and Security is expected to serve not only as a pioneer for green construction and operation, but also as a teaching tool for what is possible in terms of sustainability. I would encourage the Stanley Center to continue to direct this level of innovation and support towards communities that are most in need all around the world. Indigenous, marginalized communities, the Global South, and island nations such as ours, who have contributed nothing to this global crisis and yet are fighting and leading the way to stay above water. Again, welcome and thank you all for joining the great folks at the Stanley Center to celebrate this unique example of the type of innovations we need more of if we are to overcome the challenges of climate change. Komoltada. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to President Heine for sending us this message. I've had the opportunity to collaborate with her on a couple of different projects that we've done here, and I'm so glad that she could provide that for us. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and participants joining us via live stream, good evening, and thank you for being here to commemorate this extraordinary milestone in the Stanley Center's history. I extend a special welcome to all of those joining us remotely. I'm Keith Porter, the President and CEO of the Stanley Center for Peace and Security. Tonight we gather to pay tribute to the roots of the Stanley Center, honor the legacy of its founders, and express our deep gratitude to the community that has supported us throughout this journey. This organization began in 1956 with 5 board members, Max and Betty Stanley and their 3 children, David, Dick, and Jane, and we are so pleased to have one of our founding board members, Jane Stanley Stevenson, here with us tonight, and you'll hear more from Jane later on this evening. Max was an exceptional entrepreneur and business person. He grew 2 enormously successful businesses right here in Muscatine, Stanley Consultants and the H&I family of companies. Betty was a devoted philanthropist and avid supporter of the arts, education, and the environment. They both had a deep interest in world peace and security. In 1956, they and their family started what was then known as the Stanley Foundation to carry out a vision for peace that requires hard work, understanding that the global challenges we face can only be managed by countries working together, and that individuals have the ability and the responsibility to make a positive impact in the world. Today, the Stanley Center works around the world, often in collaboration with others, to address the global challenges of climate change, nuclear weapons, and mass violence and atrocities by driving policy progress, advancing effective global governance, and advocating for collective action. We also engage students and adults here in Muscatine through our global education programming. Undertaking such work from Muscatine presents both advantages and challenges. To overcome or mitigate these challenges, our board has made it a priority for us to create a highly attractive workplace including by fostering a positive organizational culture, providing development opportunities, offering competitive compensation and benefits, ensuring exceptional amenities, and more. This building is a big part of that effort. In 2019, we created a staff group called the Blue Skies Committee to dream about the ideal office for our organization. The group provided me with a memo that, among other things, said we needed both private offices and we needed the ample space for collaborative discussion, that we needed a friendly and inviting communal kitchen and eating area, that we needed outdoor meeting space, that we needed lots of plants, and that we needed lots of natural light, and that we needed spaces to promote fitness and overall well-being. The memo also emphasized the need for our space to promote environmental sustainability, energy efficiency, recycling, and composting. As an organization dedicated to fighting climate change, it was essential for us to walk the talk and embody our values in a tangible way. By the end of 2019, we had engaged Newman Monson as our architect. They put us through a number of processes, including an all-staff visioning exercise, which reinforced and added rich detail to the ideas already put forward in the Blue Skies memo. Newman Monson introduced us to the Living Building Challenge, the LBC. The LBC is the most rigorous, proven performance environmental building standard in the world. It involves achieving excellence in 7 distinct areas known as petals. And you'll be able to see those 7 petals here on the slide. They are place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty and inspiration. I won't go into detail about each of them, but I will note that the LBC requires not only for the building to be built in compliance with the 7 petals, but that each project, including ours, complete a 1-year certification program where we prove that we are generating more power than we use, that we are treating and using all of the water that falls on our lot, that we are increasing the health and happiness of the people who work in the building, that we remain centered on equity, that we are making our neighborhood a better place, and much more. These demands are such that only 34 buildings in the world have achieved the full Living Building certification, and you can see those on the map here. We are aiming to enter our 1-year certification program later this summer, and if all goes well, by the end of next year, Muscatine will be added to this map. By the end of 2020, we had selected this building as the place where we would invest in our new headquarters. We took time to learn the history of this little plot of land. We took time to imagine what this site looked like before any human intervention. We built and continue to build meaningful, authentic relationships with the first human inhabitants here, indigenous people, including the Meskwaki. We acknowledge that they did not give up this land voluntarily and that they still have a claim here, and that colonialism and imperialism not only did enormous damage in the past, but continues to do damage here and around the world. Beyond merely acknowledging this state of affairs, we intend to hold ourselves accountable and help others understand their accountability. As you heard before, a small part of that effort is our Tree of Accountability project, and you can learn more about that over there and on the back of your menu and program card. We were intrigued by the pearl button industry and how it impacted this piece of land, how it led to a spirit of entrepreneurism in this community. We also learned how the pearl button industry is a cautionary tale when it comes to ignoring environmental sustainability and ignoring the needs to be a good steward of natural resources. We're excited by the fact that we now sit next door to the home of Alexander Clark and his daughter, Susan Clark. Alexander was a prominent African-American citizen of Muscatine in the late 1800s, a graduate of the University of Iowa Law School, and a U.S. ambassador. He also worked to desegregate schools in Muscatine in Iowa. He wanted his daughter Susan to go to the White High School, which is right there across 3rd Street, rather than walk several miles to the black school. In 1868, he took the case to the Iowa Supreme Court, and as a result, Iowa schools were desegregated by law 86 years before the Brown versus Board of Education decision that desegregated schools nationwide. We sit right in the middle of that history. In 1901, this site became the home of the Musser Public Library, and continued to be so until 2018. Because we're an organization devoted to enlightenment and education, we deeply value this location as a site of learning and public understanding for over a century. Through our efforts, we aspire to give back to both our local community and the world at large. By embracing the Living Building Challenge, we position ourselves as pioneers, paving the way for others to make similar commitments more easily. It would take a long time for me to thank everyone who's had a hand in this project. In one sense, everyone who was here this evening, everyone who was invited, was included because you played some role, whether large or small, in making this organization a success and this building a reality. So thank you to each and every one of you. I want to call out for special recognition Newman Monson, Graham Construction, H&I Hahn and Allsteel, the Musser Public Library, Muscatine Power and Water, and the City of Muscatine for making this project possible. Please give them a round of applause as well. Above all, I want to thank the staff and governance of the Stanley Center. So I'd like you to please stand if you are now or ever have been a staff member of the Stanley Center or the Stanley Foundation. If you've ever been a staff member, please stand and remain standing. Now, you guys remain standing, and if you have now or ever have been a member of the governance, a member or director of the Stanley Center or the Stanley Foundation, would you please stand as well? Thank you all very much. You can be seated. These are the people who really make it happen around here, and I'm so happy to have so many of them here tonight. At this point in our program, we're going to continue to enjoy the Jazz Quartet under the direction of Corey Kendrick. Let's give them a round of applause as well. Thank you guys very much for sharing your talents with us, and I will invite you all to enjoy your dinner. We'll resume our program after dinner with remarks by our two very special guests, and we'll conclude a little later on with our dedication ceremony. Thank you all again for being here. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt all the great conversations going on. I just love the mix of people that we have here tonight, and I can just imagine all the great conversations that are being had, and we're just so happy to have you all here enjoying this space with us. You know, we told our architects that we wanted this space down here to be flexible space so that we could do all kinds of things. I don't think we specified turning it into a ballroom or a dining hall, but we did it, and now we know that we can, so that's really exciting. I also wanted to call attention to these sheets that are on your table. Most of you have a sheet that's been printed on paper that is actually wildflower seeds, so this paper can be planted. If you look at the bottom, it gives you a little bit of information about that. So I think we ran out, so some of you might just be on paper, but most of them are plantable products, so take a look at that. I want to tell you all that, I want to tell you a little bit about what's coming up here. During his lifetime, our late and former chair and president, Richard Stanley, maintained relationships with key thinkers and leaders around the world. Dick was particularly keen to find people in foreign ministries, in academia, and in international institutions who shared the Stanley Center's vision and values and who wanted to strategically engage in managing the biggest challenges facing the world and in building the institutions that would maintain a safe, secure, and peaceful world, a world which respected the dignity of each and every individual. Dick had a knack for finding these people, and he hit the jackpot when he met Robert Orr. Bob Orr worked in the U.S. foreign policy realm at the National Security Council and the U.S. mission to the United Nations. He then served for a decade among the top leaders of the United Nations. He epitomizes the qualities of an exemplary international civil servant, having worked closely with luminaries such as former Secretaries-General Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon. Bob played a pivotal role in advising UN leaders on critical issues such as climate change, counterterrorism, peace building, women and children's health, sustainable energy, and public-private partnerships. To this day, he continues to serve as the Special Advisor on Climate Change to the current Secretary-General, Antonio Gutierrez. He is also the Dean of the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland. Bob has been participating in Stanley events for more than 20 years, and in 2014, he joined our advisory council where he served for 7 years. His dedication to our cause remains unwavering, and he continues to offer his valuable time and advice to our organization. We are truly grateful for his steadfast allyship. I am delighted to have Bob present with us at this momentous occasion in our organizational history. Please join me in giving a warm and enthusiastic welcome to our friend and colleague, Dr. Robert Orr. Thank you so much, Bob. Thanks for being here.
Hello, Muscatine. You have to forgive me. I've been waiting 20 years to say that. I would like to first thank Jane, Lynn, Joe, and the entire Stanley family, and Keith and the entire Stanley Center family for the invitation to join you here tonight. You have made an honest man of me. Dick Stanley extended a standing invitation to come visit Muscatine over 20 years ago. And every year he would renew the invitation and I would say, Dick, I'm coming. Dick, I'm coming. Then he got Mary Jo on me and I said, Mary Jo, I'm coming. So, thank you for making an honest man of me. I'm here. And if Dick and Mary Jo were here, they would very graciously say something like, well, better late than never. In the great Stanley tradition, we can't just have a party to celebrate this amazing new headquarters. We all have to do a little work. Stanley Center makes things fun, but they make you work. And the work is to make the world a better place. And to that end, I'd like to share a few reflections with you tonight about how we can pursue a future that we all want for ourselves and for succeeding generations. Creating a sustainable future for all starts right here in Muscatine, Iowa, and it extends to every corner of the globe. The Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are the 21st century twin pillars of a global vision for global collective action to scale the desperately needed global public goods that are in short supply. As a special advisor to the UN Secretary-General on Climate Change currently, and as someone who had a hand in crafting the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals, I could be accused of not being entirely dispassionate about these two agreements. And I will acknowledge that. But the fact is, none of us can afford to be dispassionate about climate change or the crises besetting people in all corners of our planet. None of us are disinterested. Climate change, or global heating, if you prefer, is our world's greatest existential challenge. But climate change is embedded in the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm just curious tonight, how many of you have heard of or know what the Sustainable Development Goals are? Awesome. There's the Stanley influence right there. Stanley Center, you're doing your job. The Sustainable Development Goals have as one of the 17 goals combating climate change. And climate change as the big challenge that I've worked on for years, I always felt needed its own thing. It got it, the Paris Agreement. But it's embedded in a set of goals that are social, economic, and affect every aspect of life. These twin pillars of global sustainability are central because they're not just about planetary sustainability. They're about the sustainability for all life forms on the planet, including human beings. Make no mistake, our survival is at stake. I took a run along the river this morning, heard all about the last time that my colleague Georgina Dodge was here. Things were flooded over here and the water was up to here, and you know, she told a good tale like any good Iowan would. The water was in. That's happening everywhere. It's not just here that you suffer the effects of flooding, and the 100-year floods are every year. Our survival is at stake, and the sobering truth is we are not winning the battle against climate change. As much as is happening, we are not winning the battle. That said, the Paris Agreement is a framework, the novel international agreement that is now the template for many different agreements of getting the world's countries to come together to agree on what each of them will do individually that collectively has to add up to what has to be done. And this collective action problem has bedeviled the planet on many issues, none more so than on climate change. This new system that came into being in 2015 in the Paris Agreement is a powerful tool, but as of yet, it is not proving up to the challenge to motivate all the change that we need. And yet, what this agreement did, beyond just getting the governments to agree, was to put everyone into the agreement. Businesses, cities, towns, nonprofits, educational institutions, and literally every citizen of every country around the world. Once you start looking at that kind of a coalition, even climate change starts to look solvable. To achieve the ambitious targets in the Paris Agreement, everyone will have to do their part. I heartily laud the Stanley Center for walking the talk, and Keith, you used the term walking the talk. It was in my remarks before you said it. This building is an amazing example of walking the talk. Not everyone around the world can afford to build a building like this, but a lot of people can. And they just don't do it because they haven't seen it done before. Well, now we've seen it done before. Thank you for trailblazing yet again, Stanley Center. The Sustainable Development Goals that more of you than the average ballroom around the world knows. And by the way, I ask that question wherever I go. I love the fact that over half the hands in the room went up. You should be proud of that. Mr. Mayor, take note. You've got a very educated, globally educated population here in Muscatine. The Sustainable Development Goals, like the Paris Agreement, created a system where every country is responsible for not only agreeing to a global set of goals, but then implementation plans for what they're going to do in their own country. This has led to a competitive process within countries of cities competing with other cities to be better and achieve more for health, for education, for the welfare of their citizens. It has created a competitive rise to the top dynamic around the world. And this agreement was the first time that the United States joined in with everyone else on this. Thank you, Stanley Center. So we do have a long way to go to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. But we are in the fight, and it's a fight for our lives. We do have clarity of purpose, we have agreement on what needs to be done, and we're mobilizing new actors every day to rise to these challenges. As an educator now, I can safely say that this generation of young people is not just interested in sustainability, they demand it. And this generation is creating new businesses, is creating new modes of financing, is creating new nonprofits to rise to the challenge. So we aren't there yet, but I am hopeful that we are getting there. And again, the education work that the Stanley Center does is impressive, not just here in Muscatine, but what you facilitate around the world. Congratulations, Stanley Center. But to create a sustainable future for all, we have to focus not only on what we need to do, but how we need to do it. Sustainability requires everyone and every institution to do their piece. In order to drive sustainability and sustainability thinking into every corner of our society, our economy, and around the world, we will have to bring diverse people and institutions into a common effort. The world is diverse in many ways upon multiple axes: diversity of personal and community identities, diversity of interests, diversity of ideologies, diversity of economic, social, and political systems. We have a very diverse world. What we need to figure out is how to leverage that diversity to solve these global problems. Recently, a Brazilian PhD student studying in the United States called me and asked me to do an interview about what she called the most successful experience of UN reform she could find. And I waited. Okay, what was the most successful? I'd be happy to talk with you about it. First, tell me what it is. And she identified the 2005 summit that we put on at the United Nations. That was the 5-year review of the Millennium Development Goals, the predecessor of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I pressed her on this, why do you consider that the most successful? And she started to tick off a list of what we achieved at that one summit. A brand new post-conflict peace-building architecture for countries coming out of war, the creation of a new Human Rights Council and strengthened human rights architecture, a new global norm for responsibility to protect, to avoid genocide and mass violence, the world's first universally agreed global counterterrorism strategy, a universal and more detailed agreement on the then Millennium Development Goals, and new civilian policing capacity for the United Nations with women at its core, and more. So I told her, I'm convinced, I'll be happy to do this interview. So my Brazilian interlocutor wanted to know how all this was achieved. I recounted how what began as a cacophony of interests and all these big words, how diverse identities, voices, and interests and systems evolved over a period of time into universal agreement on multiple issues that had previously avoided agreement. I credited vision and leadership of then Secretary-General Kofi Annan. I credited multiple countries and constituencies rising together to demand change. I credited our strategy of bundling up a range of issues in which all countries had at least some crucial abiding interest in success on at least one of the issues, but then bundled them together to say we need agreement on all of these. And then finally, I cited a robust and highly inclusive consultation and drafting process that celebrated diversity of identities, diversity of opinions and interests, and all of that consultation done before member states sat down to start negotiating. So I won't say she was impressed, but she said, okay, I'm listening. And what, you ask, was the golden thread in the inclusive, robust consultations across countries with diverse interests and views that knit so many significant and universally agreed outcomes together? The Stanley Center. or foundation as it was then known. For years before, during, and after that 2005 summit, we in the Secretary-General's office worked hand in hand with the Stanley Foundation to provide good offices and well-structured conferences and dialogues to help the world's countries work through some of its sharpest disagreements and thorniest issues. The Stanley Conference on Responsibility to Protect at a former monastery in Portugal, Patty, really well chosen wherever you are, brought together Russian, Cuban, Chinese, and Indian representatives who had fundamental qualms with the responsibility to protect, brought them together with Europeans, Americans from all over the Americas, and Africans to discuss their disagreements about this new emerging global norm on genocide prevention. The result? A successful, powerful new norm against mass violence and genocide prevention. On the shores of the Chesapeake Bay, we hammered out our key understandings on the so-called root causes of terrorism. We brought together Palestinians and Israelis, Pakistanis and Indians to look each other in the eye and work on a global counterterrorism strategy together. The Stanley Foundation helped us hammer out an agreement that human rights, respecting human rights, was a fundamental part of any counterterrorism strategy. This, in the immediate wake of 9/11, when people in this country were in no mood to worry about human rights in their counterterrorism strategy. We hammered out an agreement on protecting and supporting victims of terrorism, no matter who were the victims and who were the perpetrators. Thank you, Stanley Center. On human rights, in Tarrytown, New York, we got US, Pakistani, Saudi Arabian, Chinese, and Iranian representatives to recognize the manifest weaknesses in the old Commission on Human Rights and to make multiple architectural fixes to that UN body. The result? A reinvigorated, more representative, and more broadly supported human rights body that left behind some troubling baggage and gained a new lease on life. Thank you, Stanley Foundation Center. And in all three cases, and on the overall 2005 summit preparations themselves, the Stanley Foundation facilitated significant, lasting decisions and reforms that drew on diverse people, diverse countries, ideas, interests, and converted them into meaningful, universally agreed changes to advance peace, development, human rights, and global cooperation. Not at all bad for a small family foundation based in Muscatine, Iowa. I bet many of you in this room don't know how connected you are to all of these things that are happening out there in the world. Well, you are. And so I began with Muscatine, and I'm going to end here. This gorgeous, impressive, and sustainable new headquarters for the Stanley Center is the physical embodiment of a vibrant institution that builds on strong Stanley, deeply Muscatine, and quintessentially American legacy. I look forward to working with you to achieve a more peaceful and sustainable future for all in decades to come. I thank you very much for the honor of inviting me tonight. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce the real talent tonight. Elizabeth Nyamayaro is an award-winning humanitarian and special advisor for the United Nations World Food Program. Born in Zimbabwe, Elizabeth has worked at the forefront of global development for over 2 decades, improving the lives of underserved populations, and has been instrumental in fighting global inequalities advancing social justice, and challenging the status quo to accelerate women's rights around the world. Through her leadership roles at the World Bank, the World Health Organization, UNAIDS, and UN Women. I think you've got just about all of them covered, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the mastermind behind He for She, which not only has a great slogan, He for She, remember that, a United Nations global solidarity movement for gender equality that took the world by storm, generating more than 1.2 billion conversations on social media. 1.2 billion. You can get her advice after this is all over tonight. I, at the time, was at the UN when she pulled this off, and I will tell you, I've never been more proud of my organization. Elizabeth wrote a memoir about her life experiences, and the title simply says, I Am a Girl from Africa. So will you please welcome this most amazing girl from Africa, Elizabeth.
I think we're going to everything. God, thank you, Bob, for again, you're making me emotional. Thank you so much, everyone, and again to the Stanley family, we are honored to be here today. Keith, Mark, and the rest of the team, thank you so much for having us. This is very special. I'm honored to speak to you today about how to create equality. But first, I have an important question for you. If I were to ask you to name the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word Africa, what would it be? Does anybody want to give this a shot? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word Africa? Dance, correct? Beauty. Anyone else? I'll take a third one. Music. Yes. Indeed, Africa is all these things, but it is so much more. So on that note, as an African, I'm going to do what we do best. I'm going to tell you a story. This right here is the hut where I grew up in my small village in Zimbabwe, where my gogo, my grandmother, raised me. It is inside this hut that Gogo first taught me what it means to be human. It is here where she showed me the true meaning of community and what it takes to fight for equality. One evening, as we sat around a blazing fire with thick smoke swirling around us, Gogo looked at me and said, "We have to find a way to forgive the oppressors." Gogo was referring to the British colonizers who had ruled our country for 99 years, creating deep divisions amongst us Africans. You see, I was born during my country's revolution, the struggle to end racial oppression. And I knew that long before my birth, Gogo had been a freedom fighter in the struggle to liberate our country. I'd witnessed sorrow drown her face and pain extinguish the burning fire in her eyes the first time she shared stories from the war with me. But then, in 1980, everything changed. I turned 6, the war ended, and we were finally free. But this freedom brought with it many challenges. Because even though we're liberated as a country, we're so much more divided. That's because for 99 years, the British had enforced a tactic of divide and conquer by splitting us into different groups and tribes, then giving each group different rights, then using those rights to pit us against each other. The tactic worked. For 99 years, we fought amongst ourselves while the British continued to rule over all of us. So needless to say that by the time the war ended, we were so divided, and yet in this very fragile state, we had to make the most critical decision in our country's history. We had to figure out how to move out of our repressive state and reconstitute a new Zimbabwe. And this is when Gogo taught me the importance of choice and what it means to stand on the right side of history. We must find a way to forgive the oppressors, my dear child. We must remember our Ubuntu, she said. This word. To be honest with you, up until that moment, I had never heard of the word Ubuntu. But I would quickly learn that Ubuntu is the essence of who we are as Africans. A lesson we learned from our ancestors that teaches us that we are all deeply connected as human beings. Ubuntu means I am because we are, and because we are, you are. In other words, I am because you are, and because you are, I am. Ubuntu recognizes the inescapable truth that our shared humanity binds us, connecting us to each other, no matter who you are, or where you're from, or what you believe. Ubuntu acknowledges each of us as part of a greater whole, as part of a community. It is the understanding that what impacts one of us directly will eventually impact all of us indirectly. And because of this, Gogo explained, when we cause others to suffer, we in turn cause suffering to ourselves, which is why we had to forgive the oppressors. But how could we forgive them? I mean, how could we forgive them after all the harm they caused us? How could we forgive them after they treated us as inferior in our own country for 99 years? Why couldn't we just punish them, or chase them out of our country, or demand reparations? But as Gogo further explained that evening, none of these choices, however justified, held with them the potential to truly move our country forward and out of our dark past. Rather, we had to choose a new path, a completely different path, one of forgiveness that would allow us to reimagine our society in the future, one that broke down the wall between ourselves and our oppressors, one that enabled us to embrace our shared humanity and coexist as one people. In that moment, one thing became very apparent to me, that in the face of any injustice, we always have a choice. It may not feel like it, but we always have a choice. A choice to either right the wrongs of the past or to perpetuate those wrongs. A choice to either stand on the right side of history or end up firmly on the wrong side. In our case, we chose to stand on the right side of history and forgave the colonizers in the spirit of Ubuntu and worked alongside them to rebuild a new Zimbabwe. It was not easy. But during this challenging time, Ubuntu enabled us to focus on our shared humanity as a foundation for reconciliation. It served as a solution for dissolving painful divisions and hatred. Ubuntu provided us with a path forward through healing and hope. When I look at the world right now, I'm once again reminded of how much healing and hope is needed. We currently live in a fractured society that is built upon systems and structures that often pit us against each other. Pitting me against you, pitting us over here against them over here, women against men, black people against white people, Republicans against Democrats, and so forth. And these divisions have left many of us feeling frustrated and angry. But we're also filled with so much pain that it's made it difficult for us to come together to address many of the global challenges that actually require our societal approach. Like the COVID pandemic, we saw what happened with that, and climate change, which have both highlighted our collective interdependence. So the question is, where do we go from here? How can we find healing in the wake of so much suffering? How can we find a path forward in a world that is so divided? It's my firm conviction that Ubuntu, the very essence of our African cultures, could be the solution that we all need right now to build a world that is more just, more equal, and more sustainable. Ubuntu, in simple terms, is a social awareness, a consciousness of others. It is not religious or political in any way, but rather a way of living and seeing the world through this interconnectedness of our shared humanity. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, in a real sense, all life is interrelated. All mankind is caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. Dr. King's words echoes the values of Ubuntu, reminding us that none of us live in isolation and that we need each other. You belong to a family. You belong to a broader community, a community of workers and colleagues, and even to the world. And because of this belonging, you owe it to those to which you belong. You have a responsibility to do your part to uplift their lives. I want to share with you how Ubuntu once saved my life. I was 8 years old at the time when a severe drought, which by the way was the early signs of climate change. So my family and my community, we were on the front lines of climate change. A severe drought happened, and it killed everything in its path. Our crops wilted, our livestock perished, our rivers dried up, leaving us with nothing to eat and nothing to drink. We went for days without food. I'm going to read for you a short passage from my memoir, I'm a Girl from Africa, of what happened next. Stand. I tell myself, but I cannot. I lie on my stomach, my legs stretched out, my arms limp at my side, my palms turned towards the heavens, begging for mercy. I burrow my face deeper into the ground, seeking shelter from the scorching sun, yet the earth feels as hot as fire, practically sizzling beneath me. There is no cool or comfortable place to hide. The leaves of the trees are long gone, and with it the shade bent away by the punishing drought that has descended on our small village in Zimbabwe. Rise, I think, but I cannot. I'm simply too weak to move. I am starving. I've had nothing to eat or drink for 3 days. My shrinking stomach growls like two hungry hyenas fighting over a goat. I'm so thirsty. It's as if sharp, tiny razors slice the inside of my throat with each breath or attempt to swallow. I've never felt so hollow and wasted from hunger. I worry that the drought may never end and I will never leave this tree. I would die here, I think. But I'm too tired to be truly frightened. In my young mind, I thought I was going to die. But then this incredible thing happened. A fellow African who was an aid worker with the United Nations found me. She gave me a bowl of porridge and saved my life. And it's this moment that I realized that I too wanted to be just like her, so that one day I too might be able to save the lives of others in a similar way that my life has been saved. I often reflect on the girl that saved my life. I often wonder whether I would even be here today if she had not known of Ubuntu or understood that her own belonging as part of our community was reasons enough to give back. I'm so thankful that I met her, and that several decades later, I joined the United Nations and achieved my dream. So today, I want to invite all of us to make an important choice. To choose allyship and solidarity over hatred and division. I know that a lot has happened, and understandably there's so much pain. But here's what I know to be true. I know that true equality isn't black people against white people, but rather all of us against racism. It isn't women against men, but all of us against sexism. One of my favorite quotes is from Nelson Mandela. I don't know if many of you know him, but he became South Africa's first black president at the fall of apartheid, yet another system of racial oppression which had been subjected to the majority of South Africans for nearly half a century. And when Nelson Mandela, who had been in prison for 27 years for standing up against apartheid, was released from prison, he too, just like we had a decade before in my own country of Zimbabwe, found himself with an important decision to make. To either retaliate against his oppressors or to choose a different path. Nelson Mandela once again evoked the spirit of Ubuntu and chose to forgive his oppressors. Now, how many of us in this room believe that the people that oppress you and cause you harm and pain deserve your forgiveness? Oh, we have a very generous woman back there. That's really wonderful, because I know it's hard for most people. It's hard for me, right? It's hard to imagine that the person that's causing harm needs your forgiveness. It should be the other way around. But that's precisely what Mandela did. And he later explained it this way, and this is one of the most powerful quotes I've ever seen. It was during those long and lonely years that the hunger for the freedom of my own people became a hunger for the freedom of all people, white and black. I knew, as well as I knew anything, that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. For a man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He's caught behind the bars of narrow-mindedness and prejudice. Very powerful. And I would argue that the same is true for equality, that our hunger for our own equality should be the hunger for the equality of all. So in these challenging times, I want to invite you to live Ubuntu. For so long, we told ourselves a lie, that the more power, the more success, the more money we have, the more healthier and happier and fulfilled our lives will become. But I think most of us were realizing that this individualistic approach to life is in so many ways false. Because despite our accomplishments and successes, despite fleeting moments of happiness, many of us don't feel fulfilled with our lives. In fact, the more money you make, the more things you want, and generally the more less fulfilled you become. So I would argue that perhaps it's time to re-examine what's actually important. And maybe rather than the constant quest for individual pursuit above all else, it's likely that building community and having a sense of belonging can help us create more fulfillment in our lives. Ubuntu is that invitation to create community. It's an invitation to see the humanity in each other and build allyship so we can solve our most pressing global challenges. The important thing to remember, though, is that Ubuntu only works when people like you and I commit to creating change. And following more than 2 decades working as a humanitarian, I'm not going to lie to you. Ending pressing inequalities is a tough mission and not for the faint-hearted. It is bloody, it is exhausting, it requires constant work. It requires that we challenge our innate biases and assumptions about others. It requires that we engage in difficult conversations and allow for the inevitable mistakes along the way. It requires that we let go of the old stories we tell ourselves so that our new lives may begin. If we are serious about equality, we are going to have to build bridges with those whom we may otherwise view as the other. We are going to have to find the Nelson Mandela in us in moments of conflict and crisis and use forgiveness over retaliation. Most importantly, we are going to have to stay in the fight for as long as needed without ever giving up, even when at times it might feel like a dance, that one big step towards progress becomes 2 steps back. My gogo, my grandmother always used to say that each generation faces its own choices. How can we grow? How can we become better tomorrow than we are today? And that's for everyone in this room. How can we stand on the right side of history? When the 13th Amendment declared this is wrong, legally enslaving another human being came to an end and the whole world grew. When women around the world demanded the right to vote, they took a fundamental step towards equality and the whole world grew. When people like you and you and you and you and I stand up for what is right, the world grows. Ubuntu, this precious gift out of the African continent is our invitation to grow. An invitation to fully understand what it means to be human. An invitation to look beyond the divisions within our society and embrace our shared humanity. So that perhaps we might begin to heal and find a path forward. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. Bob, would you please come join us as well? We have a couple of gifts for each of you.
Only if I can stand next to her.
Let's give Elizabeth another round of applause. This is wonderful, right? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for making our event so special. Thank you. We really appreciate it. We have these gifts. These are handmade right here in Muscatine. And that's just a token of our appreciation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. All right, I promise we're only going to keep you here just a little bit more. Dessert is coming, and then we'll have one more very short dedication, and the bar will reopen, and we'll be ready to go. So please enjoy your dessert. Thank you again for being here. Stand. Hello, everyone. I'd like to get your attention for just a few more minutes. We're about to wrap up here. And Mark. Okay, so we're going to have a few of our governance members, people who have so long been associated with the organization. And as I mentioned, there's no one better for us to start with than Jane Stanley Stevenson, one of our founding board members. We are so honored to have her here. Let's please give a warm welcome to Jane. You can hold it if you want. Okay. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me? All I have to say about this building that we are all in is wow. Amazing. And I'm a little extra prejudiced because 32 years ago, I started a public charity in New York City to help artists. And we have developed a partnership with Stanley Center. And there are either 12 or 14 of our artists' creations right here in this building right now. A long time ago, and I can remember it, my mom and dad had all three of their children for dinner. No friends or spouses could come. And we had a very nice, right before Christmas dinner. And then we adjourned to the living room where my father informed us that they had created 2 foundations. One of them was the E&M Charities for Elizabeth and Maxwell. And they were to be giving grants to people in Muscatine, organizations, ways to help the whole society in Muscatine, or maybe a little in Iowa. And definitely because of Mom's interest in art, Some of the money could go to organizations that would help artists. That was E&M Charities, and it was funded to be able to give grants. The other one, and that obviously was my mother's responsibility to see how it went forward and what was done. My father's was Stanley Foundation. And he said to us that evening and many other times, he had, let me preface this, he had become the head person nationwide leading, and I don't know whether it was called president or on the board or whatever it was, the fight for establishing United World Federalists. Now, some of you know exactly what that meant, and I will very shortly describe it and leave out a whole lot that those of you who know about it know. It was the idea that you could take the United Nations and you could change and shape and expand it so that there'd be an executive branch, there would be a legislative branch, there would be a judicial branch for the globe, for the whole world, and they would also have a military so that if there were places where violence broke out, they could handle it. And my father's words on that December in 1956 in their living room were, "The world is not ready for United World Federalists. We need to do a whole lot of education." And that was his beginning idea for Stanley Foundation, was that it would reach out. And of course, they reached out first in Iowa, first in Muscatine, and then in Iowa, and so on. But as things went along, the foundation began to do more. And it began to publish people's writings on ideas that would help to make the world grow safer and become more globally together. And as early as Outant, and it may have happened before then, Outant said that when an issue came up, he was Secretary-General at the time, when an issue came up that he hadn't had time to study or research, he turned to something that had been published by Stanley Foundation. So already there was the establishment of a respect for the information that the foundation was either putting together or finding people who knew that what they were doing to publish, etc. And when it started out, the Stanley Foundation had my father and one helper. And then they got really busy and they got 2 interns from University of Iowa. So it started very low and very slow. And there was a lot of emphasis on United Nations in the earlier years. But what I am so blown away by and so impressed with is that when they began, and Keith, I don't know how much of this you were in on, but when you got to the point of choosing 3 crisis areas, and each were probably 5 years to be dealt with, and what happened was, here we are in Muscatine, Iowa, and people say, well, how did you do that? Because you're not in New York where the UN is, and you're not in Washington, D.C., and I see that as one of the biggest positives for Stanley Foundation then, Stanley Center now. We are not lumped in with the ideas in those 2 places, but looked at as an independent, really researching and finding ideas and actions that can be taken kind of organization. So I think it helps us to be in Muscatine. Maybe it doesn't always help you, but I think so. And the way I would describe it, which is an oversimplification, I'm sure, is that this organization has become one of the best convening organizations that exists. Because in each of the 3 areas where they're working, they find a small part, not trying to solve the whole thing as a big thing all at once, a small part that is being ignored or not developing well enough or not being handled, no progress is being made, and they find the individuals and the organizations who know the people and with themselves and the people they know can actually make progress and solve some of the problems. I call that convening. It could be called other things, but it is the way I believe that that Stanley Foundation, now Stanley Center, has become so exceptional. And Keith, I admire with every bit of my body how absolutely fantastic your staff is, and their ability to reach out and pull together and convene, I think, is amazing. So. I'm really sitting here only because Keith wanted me to tell you what I thought would be my father's reaction to this building. Well, I have to just say a few words about my father. My father was born in 1904. He was a very bright, brilliant, intelligent man. He became an engineer, and he was formal to his children and in many ways. He didn't develop the smiley, happy kind of approach with people, but he was wonderful to talk with them about serious matters. And he was smart, but he was also incredibly loyal. The relationship that he and my mother had, honest, this is true. I left home at 17 to go to college. During all of those years, I had never heard them fight, not once, or argue. Well, how impossible is that? Did they not live in reality? And what it was, that because both of them were extremely intelligent, they decided they didn't want that kind of thing happening in front of their children, but they talked. After we went to bed, or when they were somewhere else, they talked and talked and talked, and they talked everything out. So when you give Max Stanley credit for anything, you better know that my mother had talked it all through with him first. And so we grew up with parents who were, my mom was born 2 years after my dad, and they met at University of Iowa because my mother's roommate, named Marion, was a cousin of my father. So that's how I ended up with the middle name Marion. The way that they interacted was that Dad became pretty dependent on Mom to handle the social and the niceties and so on for all the traveling they did and when they entertained the head of some small state or whatever it might be. But I just want you to drill into your brain the fact that they were a pair. They were a beautifully compatible pair. And Mom did not do things with E&M Charities without having discussed them with Dad, and Dad discussed an amazing amount, because most people see him as working independently. No, my mom was there too. Okay, now what did they think about this building? When I was 5 years old, we moved into a new home, 115 Sunset Drive, just off Mulberry Avenue, for those of you who are Muscatinites. And my father had it built, or built it and designed a lot of it himself. And he didn't talk lightly about things or chuckle about things that much, but I heard him at least 4 times say, people come and they see what I'm doing with this new home, and they scratch their heads and they say, that Stanley must be crazy. And he took some joy and smiles from it. And what he was doing was, for example, all of the inner walls were cement blocks, the big ones. Oops, sorry. The big ones? Okay. Never to be painted. Never by the children in the house to be touched in case you'd get oil on them. And another major big difference was that he put in copper tubing for one of the first 10 houses in the United States to have radiant heating. My grandson and I were out there today talking to one of the men who helps do caretaking for the house, and it is still running. It was put in 1941, right before we got involved in the World War. In fact, we moved in September, October. I was 5 years old at the time, and I can remember many times an arrangement made for an architect to come and look at a home with radiant heating, and we'd be lying on the floor reading the comics in the Sunday paper, and we'd have to get up and so on so that the architect could come and see it. But it still exists. So what would my father say about this? I think he would be so excited, Keith. I think he would say, you are doing exactly what you must do. Forget the cost, forget the time, forget the rest. You're leading the country. It's good. So that's what I believe would be his reaction. But let me tell you, before he said it, he would have talked it over with my mom.
Thank you so much, Jane. Let's give Jane another round of applause. We are so lucky to have her here today and to have her inspiration, and she has been such a source of inspiration for me and advice and calming influence and all those kind of things over many, many years. Thank you, Jane. I also then want to call to the stage another member of our governance, Catherine Elliott. She is the great-granddaughter of Max Stanley. Great-granddaughter, there we go. And but more importantly, what I really want to emphasize about Catherine is she was part of our office space steering committee. She brought a ton of her own expertise and knowledge to that experience and really helped us a lot in our dealings with our architects and our contractors. She's been such a great influence, and we are so lucky to have what we now call our fourth generation governance member. So please welcome Catherine Elliott.
All right, well, as usual, Keith is being far too generous, so let's just get that out of the way. Like he said, I am one of Bax and Betty's great-grandchildren. Dick and Mary Jo were my grandparents. So I grew up coming to Muscatine as a visitor, first to see grandparents, and then gradually for responsibility and meetings with this mysterious organization called the Stanley Foundation. For my entire memory, the Stanley Center, then foundation, was in the Laurel Building up the street. My first clear memory of visiting the center was arriving at the door, maybe a little late, and I didn't really know where to go. You had to call someone, there was an elevator, you had to go up to the 6th or 7th floor. You couldn't just happen upon the offices. But this week I turned the corner on Iowa Avenue, and there it was. Here we are, in the heart of the downtown, at street level, a big sign, fresh plantings, shiny cisterns, unusual canopy. the Stanley Center for Peace and Security at home here in Muscatine, where everyone can see it. There are so many things that can be said about this building. The most obvious ones are tied to the Living Building program, the rigorous certification program. There are impressive numbers, statistics, projections to share about energy projections or energy production, water use reduction, construction waste diverted, and more. But what I find most compelling about all of those things, those abstract ideas about resource stewardship, environmental sustainability, worker health and happiness, community integration and responsibility, those are happening here in a tangible place in Muscatine because of the Stanley Center. A key strategy the center uses in its work is the power of place. This living building is an incredibly powerful place for us to do our work. It's local, and it's a tangible embodiment of our organization's mission and values, and the vision that Max and Betty had for this organization all those years ago. Their vision was an organization that would use its resources to bring people together to address topics that are too big to handle on our own. Today, that looks like work in climate change, reducing the use of nuclear weapons, preventing mass atrocities, access to information through responsible reporting. Those topics are extremely abstract, exceptionally complicated, but they're also local. They are influenced by city councilors deciding if they are going to fund floodwater management plans, school superintendents and principals deciding if they will uphold a book ban, community centers deciding if they have to cut an after-school program in science, the editor of the local newspaper deciding what headlines to print. Usually the center is operating on a more distant, abstract level, organizing convenings with key leaders to facilitate conversations about these broad-reaching topics. The expectation, the hope, is that those conversations and learnings take on lives of their own, rippling through organizations and being transformed into tangible actions. With this building, the center is entering that cycle in an entirely different way. What comes immediately to mind is the fact that we are creating local conversations about our values. Something I recall from the design process are conversations with the city of Muscatine about why we didn't want to be connected to the municipal water system. That's a really different way of doing things. And it's not really supported by building codes. In fact, it's generally discouraged. But it's also an important way of thinking about buildings and thinking about buildings differently in a changing climate and what resilience means in the face of those challenges. It took an organization like the Stanley Center with the financial resources, the vision, the commitment to this work, and to create that conversation. And the impact? We have the tangible value of those cisterns outside. They'll capture water. They'll do a great job for this building. But there's so much more. I am certain that some of those city employees or workers who installed the cisterns brought this weird idea that crazy Stanley Foundation had back to their dining room tables and talked to their families about it. And maybe there was a kid at that table who started thinking differently about resource management and stewardship of our natural resources. Who will that kid become? What will they accomplish? What will they contribute? There are countless examples of those conversations that happened over the course of design. Could give you any number. Any of the architects and engineers in the room, builders, Graham, who worked on this, could tell you a handful of them, I'm sure. Those conversations that happened during design and construction, those will continue to happen for the lifetime of this building. I can still hear my Grandpa Dick saying, after whatever convening or meeting he was coming back from, the conference was great, but my conversation with so-and-so really felt important. There was a recognition that it was those soft spaces between the organized moments, those uncontrolled outcomes, the emergent properties of those controlled inputs, the ripple effects, that was what made the difference. And that is the purpose of the center. You see it in our logo, the spark, the names of our conference rooms: innovate, catalyze, collaborate. There's no way for us to know what this building will spark, who it will impact, or how. But we do know that we approach this project with integrity and curiosity, creativity, passion, hard work, and a faith that we can create a better future together. Those are our values, and those are the inputs that we controlled with this building. And only time will tell what emerges from it all. But in the meantime, this building, this is a home I am exceptionally proud of. Dick and Mary Jo, Max and Betty, they all would have been thrilled to see this incredible building, and most importantly, to see it here at home in Muscatine. Thank you.
All right, one last thing. Thank you so much, Catherine. I really appreciate that. That's wonderful. I'm going to invite the current chair of the board of the Stanley Center, Lynn Stanley, to please come forward. We've seen lots of buildings. We tried to do mostly non-traditional things around here, you may have known, going all the way back to our ground healing ceremony instead of a groundbreaking ceremony. But the one thing we're doing that is a little bit traditional is that most buildings have a plaque that recognizes the people who really did the work, who were part of the organizing committee that made the building happen. So we're going to unveil a plaque here, and then we're going to have a few words from the chair of the board, Lynn Stanley. All right, there you go.
For those of you who may not be able to read what's on there, I will read the words. The Stanley Center's home provides space for holding ourselves accountable to history, celebrating life, and creating a better world for all people. Dedicated June 3rd, 2023. And then the names of our steering committee who were essential to this entire thing happening: Amy Bakke, Cassie Batskill, Catherine Elliott, Dane Lovell, Jennifer Smizer, Keith Porter, Lori Zook Stanley, Mark Seaman, Patty Papke, and Warren Heidbreder.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. All right, finally, thank you all very much for being here. I've been told to remind you of a couple of things. We have parting gifts. So when you leave over here, right, Mark? When you leave out that door, we have parting gifts for each of you. Also, we have the centerpieces at each of the tables. The idea is that you should pick out the person at your table who has the next upcoming birthday, and that person gets the centerpiece. So talk amongst yourselves there, figure that out. You're all smart people, you can do it. And then I'm supposed to tell you that the bar is open, and you should mingle, you should look around. We'll be here a long time. Finally, again, thank you all for being here. This has been a super meaningful night. Thank you.